Okay, so I flipped through some videos this morning for you on YouTube to see if somebody had the perfect settings to tell you to set your camera to. And I found several videos. I didn't find any that were exactly what I would tell you to do, but I like this guy and I like the way he teaches. And so you probably might even want to subscribe to him. But there's two things where I would differ with him on how you should set your camera. He's using an SL2, it's not a Canon 80D, but it is a Canon and your settings are going to be pretty much the same. So I figured I would use his, but I would hop on here and tell you where I would differ with him in your settings. Before I say that, I want to say that the Canon 80D is a great camera for video, but it's not the best in low light. So to maximize your camera, you have to maximize your light. So even where I differ with him is going to be ways to maximize your light a little bit better because your picture quality is going to be better because of that. So that's where I'm at with it. So let's listen to him.
The first setting we want to actually do is put it on video mode. It's got a video camera right there. And then we put it on the M4 manual. Then what we want to figure out first is actually our frame rate. And so if I press the Q on the screen here, I can actually see that the frame rate right now is set to 29.97. The other frame rate on here is 59.94 frames or 60 frames.
Okay, he's going to select 29.97. I would tell you to select 23.98. This is not a matter of video quality so much because you should know feature films are recorded at 24 frames a second. So 23.98 is 24 frames a second. Totally fine. More cinematic. Nice, right? But what it also does is maximize your light because then you can set your shutter speed slower because he's about to tell you your shutter speed should be double what your frame rate is. If you have to set your shutter speed higher, then it's going to be less light that you have to work with. So I would say always 23.98.
All right, the second setting that we want to adjust here is our shutter speed. Now, the rule when shooting video is that you want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate or as close as possible. So if you're shooting 30 frames a second, then you'd want your frame rate to be 60 frames a second. If you're shooting 60 frames a second, then you'd want your frame rate to be 120 on the shutter speed. So we can do that right here, and we are actually just going to take it down to 60.
Okay, now your shutter speed can be 50 because your frame rate is 24.
All right, the third setting that we want to decide now is the aperture. And we're doing this in a particular order because the shutter speed is based off the frame rate and we need to decide the frame rate up front. So now we want to do aperture. Now, typically for the aperture, I usually like to do as fast as possible.
Okay, so aperture, fast. Fast means wide aperture, but the wider the aperture, the lower the number, so it can be confusing. A 1.8 lens is a very, very wide lens, right? The kit lens that comes with that camera is a 4.0, I believe, which means the widest it gets to is 4.0, which means 4.0 is the lowest number that it gets to. So the lower the number, the wider the aperture. But the aperture is what determines your depth of field. So I figure you're doing workout videos. You don't want a very shallow depth of field anyway, because if you do, most of you is going to be out of focus. So it's going to find one thing to focus on, and everything else is going to be out of focus because your depth of field is too shallow. So you're going to want it to be upwards of 4 anyway, probably 5, 5.6, something like that, whatever your lens will do in that area, because that'll keep everything in focus. But it's going to be darker because it makes the aperture smaller. It's not letting in as much light. So your aperture is important for focusing and depth of field, but it's also important for light. So since you can't have a super wide aperture, like you're taking a portrait and you want the background super blurred or something like that, or your subject is farther away, because if your subject is farther away, your depth of field automatically gets less shallow, more deep, right? You'll be fairly close, and you really don't need anything to be out of focus. So your aperture is going to end up pretty small, which is going to cut down on your light usage, which is why I maximized it before this happens in the process. But it's still not going to be super bright. So I hope you have lights. If you don't have lights, you probably want to get some so that you can offset what you're going to have to do with your aperture.
It starts at f4. That means it starts a little bit dark for settings like this, and we'll be able to adjust that later. So in this case, I'm gonna pick out the shot kind of first, and if I sit over here kind of by the pillow, sort of with the plant in the edge of the shot, and I'm as wide as I can go, it's at 4.0. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Now keep in mind, if I actually zoom in, it goes down to 5.6, which is lower light for us. But for now, we're just gonna leave it kind of composed on this shot.
Now, if you look right there at 4.0, it looks like pretty much everything is in focus. The front of the couch closest to us and the wall, you can still read what's on the wall. So that's a pretty deep depth of field at 4.0. So you might be able to set your lens at 4.0 and have good results. But say you're doing a plank and your head is at this side and your feet are behind, that's going to be a very, very deep depth of field. Your feet are not going to be in focus if your head is, and vice versa. So you'll probably want to be horizontally placed so that your whole body is in the plane where the depth of field is. So keep that in mind.
We've got our aperture at 4.0. That's as wide open as possible to let as much light in as possible. And then finally, we're gonna adjust the ISO. Now this is how we can get the brightness back, because this shot is a little too dark for shooting video. So again, we set our shutter speed first. We got our aperture at 4.0, as wide open as it can go.
So the ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor, right? So you're basically making up for light you don't have by making the sensor more sensitive. The thing about the sensor in the 80D, it's not the greatest at higher ISOs, and your video quality is going to degrade the more you push the ISO. So I would never ever go above 1600 ISO, and I really want to keep it around between 100, which is perfect. I mean, if you can get it to 100, you're only going to be able to do that with lights. But if you can get it to 100, that's your best. But 400 is not too much. 600 isn't too much either. It's still going to look decent. After that, I get a little, that might just be my level of perfectionism, but I definitely wouldn't go over 1600. But I would want to keep it between 1 and 400. And the way to do that is lights.
Now
or really big window, daylight. Because daylight is perfect. The sun is, of course, a great source of light. So there you go.
we're gonna adjust the ISO to bring up the brightness. So we're about to stop underexposed, and the way you measure this is on your camera, there's...
When he says a stop is a unit of aperture. So 4.0 to 5.0 is one stop. That's what he means by that. It's stopping it down means raising the number, because you're lowering the size of the aperture when you raise that number. It's inverse. I don't know why, but that's just how it is.
That exposure meter that says -3 and +3, perfectly exposed is right in the middle. And so if we press our ISO button here, we're gonna go up to ISO 200, tap the shutter speed, or tap the shutter again, and boom, perfect. Right there, it is perfectly
I ain't gonna lie, I kind of missed that touch screen though.
exposed now. And I want to just emphasize that when shooting video, you want to go in that order. You want to start by thinking, okay, what frame rate am I in first? That's your first question. Based on my frame rate, what shutter speed should I be in? That's the rule of multiple. Then, based on the effects I want or how fast my lens is, what is my aperture at? And once you've set all those things, then ISO is that final step to make sure that everything is exposed properly. Now that we have all of that set up, we're going to look at white balance.
Okay, white balance is really, really, really important. Don't set it to auto, okay? If you set it to auto white balance, you might want to cut and like take different things and put it together later, and the colors will be different because something happened with the light. You know, maybe it's a cloudy day and the clouds came in front of the sun in some parts, and then the camera saw that as a reason to change the coloring. So you'll have, two pieces of the same footage that have different color. So you don't really want to use auto white balance, although it's a great starting point because the Canon 80D is really good at determining white balance, but you want to set your white balance. And if you're using it for the same thing at the same time of day with the same lighting, then you'll be able to leave it there and you won't have to think about it again.
balance. Now this is actually how you can make all the colors in your videos as well as skin tones look the way they actually should and really look beautiful and pop. Now if you do this wrong, maybe you've been in a case where your videos have been too orange or your videos have been too blue, or maybe they just haven't been color accurate. So typically when shooting white balance, you can just hit your Q button here on Canon or just find your white balance setting, and a lot of people just shoot on auto white balance. It could be good, it could be bad. It also could change throughout the shot because the camera is adjusting on the fly. Then there's also other white balance settings in there, including daylight, shade, just different options. And you can see they turn the shots more blue and more orange. But for us, we're actually gonna use custom white balance using a gray card. And this is one of my favorite pieces of kit if you have a camera that can do custom white balance. And usually these cost around $10 or something like that. We'll put a link to it in the description below if you wanna check it out. But what I love about a gray card is you can get your white balance perfect based on the lighting of the actual scene you're in. And again, if you have a lifestyle channel, a beauty channel, and like the color palettes and the actual colors of things really matters, I definitely recommend setting custom white balance. So to do so, all you need to do is simply put that gray card and fill the frame of your image up, and then you actually want to take a picture. Now the important thing here is make sure there's not any shadows on there, like maybe you want the light that's hitting your face to be the light that is hitting that gray card. Then what you do is just snap a photograph. Then once you have that photo, go into your menu and head to custom white balance. What it's actually gonna do is it's gonna say set according to the image with that gray card in it. Now, by the way, you might be wondering, if this is white balance,
It's not going to find the image with the gray card in it. It's going to use the very last image that you shot. So just make sure you don't shoot anything else before you go here, and it'll show up.
why are we setting it to gray? Well, there's actually a white side there as well, but turns out that gray is actually even better for setting white balance. You could look that up on Wikipedia or something as to why. But now that we've got that image selected, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say set, and it's saying use the data from this image to set custom white balance. We're gonna say okay. Now we're not done yet, because if we go back to the actual image, it's still on auto white balance and it's doing all right. We can see that the blue and red on that pillow are looking pretty accurate, although the overall shot looks a tinge blue to my eye. But if we move it right, and now we select custom based off of our gray card setting, it is a lot more warm, and it's just color accurate across the board. It looks better on my skin tones. It looks better with the blue and the red on the pillow, the white of the pillow. And so again, really recommend setting custom white balance when you can and using a gray card, provided that whatever camera you're using can do custom white balance. You'll be so pleased with the color. And the last thing here is if for
Also, when you do set the white balance right, Canon is known for their color science, meaning the coloring of their cameras is superior, or at least was when the 80D came out, to most other cameras. So the color on Canon is really nice when you get it right.
some reason it doesn't look right, do it again. There's sometimes where we might do 2 or 3 photos and we just kind of keep tweaking the lighting. Sometimes it might all of a sudden be like green and really extreme. Just keep going and eventually get it dialed in, because if you get your colors right when you shoot your videos, the whole workflow is gonna be a lot better. You won't need to worry about color correcting later or anything like that, and everything will look crispy and beautiful. All right, now we still have one more step to set up before we shoot. Technically, I actually wouldn't start shooting right now. What I would do is take this footage to a computer and preview it first. That's a huge...
See, this is when I really want to get on the organ, because most people don't say that. And it looks one way on the camera, and it might look different on your computer, and it might look different on Instagram, and it might look... What it looks like on your computer is going to be the truest representation of what it actually looks like. So once you get your shit right, take it out, put it in the computer, and look at it, and then you'll know.
Power tip. I don't know if you've ever done a shoot where maybe you forgot to turn the microphone on, or where you like finally got to a computer and you're like, geez, my skin tone looks wrong or something looks wrong. What I like to do is get a clip just like this and see how the audio sounds and how the video looks on a computer full screen first before I shoot a batch of videos. All right, so let's recap. We set everything up. We set our lighting up, our tripod, our camera.
I'll talk to you about all that when I talk to you. I'm not doing this in lieu of talking to you. I'm doing this to make sure you straight. Okay?